My name is Margaret Delaney, and I didn't see it coming at first. I wish I had. I wish I could say I was sharper, quicker, more suspicious. But the truth is, when she handed me that drink, smiling wide like a hostess in a magazine spread, I almost thanked her. Just a little something for my favorite mother-in-law, she said. Voice so smooth it nearly slipped right past my instincts. But not entirely. Something inside me, call it a mother's intuition, call it experience, call it survival, stiffened. I looked at the drink. I looked at her. And I saw it. That flicker in her eyes. It was fast, barely there, like the tail of a lie slipping behind the curtain, but it was enough. Enough for me to understand that what I held wasn't a gift. It was a test, a trap, a threat. And while the others laughed around the brunch table, while my son chuckled at some joke she'd made, I reached across the table and gently switched the glasses. Her drink for her mother's. No one noticed. That's how it always starts. With silence. I didn't do it out of spite. I did it because something in me whispered, "This is the moment." I sat back and waited, just as she had planned for me to do. 35 minutes later, her mother started coughing. Her face flushed. She clutched the table. Chaos erupted. And I sat still, holding the glass meant to erase me. That moment didn't come from nowhere. It was the end of a long, careful unraveling. The beginning started years earlier when my husband passed, and it was just me and my son, Jacob. He was 12. I worked nights and mornings, sometimes double shifts. We shared dinners of boxed macaroni and folded laundry together in the evenings. He used to squeeze my hand and say, "One day I'll take care of you, Mama. Just wait." And I did wait. I waited through the years, through school, through college, through every sacrifice that stitched a better life for him. And when he got that engineering job, when he finally stood on his own 2 feet, I breathed a little easier. Until he met her. Her name was Claire. She worked in finance and walked like the ground should rise to meet her feet. I tried to like her. For his sake, I tried. She brought me flowers the first time she visited, told me I had a charming little place, like she was reviewing a bed and breakfast. She praised my cooking, then asked if I'd ever heard of air fryers for health. I brushed off the remarks at first, thinking it was a generational gap. But the little jabs kept coming. "You still use paper calendars? That's adorable." Or, "I'll help you with online shopping. It must be overwhelming at your age." Her tone was always sweet, but her words sliced. And then came her mother, Teresa, the kind of woman who wears silence like armor and diamonds like dog tags. She showed up to their engagement party in a gown I wouldn't dare wear to a funeral, and gave me a look like I was something stuck to her shoe. During dinner, in front of everyone, she leaned over and said, "Jacob must be quite taken with Claire, especially considering, well, his modest roots." I laughed it off. What else could I do? But something in me cracked. The wedding planning shut me out completely. Teresa hired planners and designers. I was given a dress code and a table number. No role, no mother of the groom speech. I told myself it didn't matter, that what mattered was my son's happiness. But that lie got harder to tell when I stood at the back of the church watching Jacob watch Claire walk down the aisle while Teresa beamed like royalty. And when Jacob didn't look back at me once, not during the ceremony, not during the reception, not during the thank you speeches, my name never mentioned, I knew something was changing. After the wedding, the distance grew. Fewer calls, visits that felt rehearsed. Claire always answered my messages. Never Jacob. "He's busy," she'd say, or "he's napping." On his birthday, I called to sing to him. Claire answered and said she'd pass along the message. I never heard back. Still, I tried. I brought dishes he used to love: meatloaf, pot pie, molasses cookies. Claire smiled and took them at the door, but they never appeared on the table when I visited. Once, I asked where the molasses cookies were, and she blinked like she'd forgotten they existed. "Oh, I think they got misplaced. Sorry." Another time, she handed me a tea she blended herself. I drank it, and an hour later, I felt dizzy and nauseous. The same happened the next month. Always after drinks she poured. I started keeping track. I kept notes in a little diary: food, symptoms, timing. A pattern formed: dizziness, confusion, fatigue. Only when I was with them. But the doctors found nothing. Age, they said. Stress. Claire suggested herbal supplements. She handed me little capsules labeled Focus and Balance and watched me swallow them. That's when I stopped taking anything she gave me. I began storing them, saving them, labeling them. I noticed my prescribed medications had shifted too. Slightly different shapes, different scents. I never accused. I never asked. I just watched. At dinners, I kept my drinks untouched. I began switching mugs, pretending to forget things, feigning confusion, just to see how she reacted. And every time, Claire smiled wider. Every time I played dazed, she got bolder. It was a performance, and I let her think she was the lead. Until that brunch. Until that drink. "A little treat for my favorite mother-in-law," she said. Same syrupy voice, same lemon twist, same glass. She turned away, and I switched them. Placed mine in front of Teresa. And I waited. 35 minutes later, as Teresa clutched her stomach and tipped sideways in her chair, as Jacob shouted for help, and Claire's hands shook with real fear for the first time, I sat still, calm, holding the glass meant to erase me. That moment didn't come from nowhere. It was the end of a long, careful unraveling. The beginning started years earlier, when my husband passed and it was just me and my son, Jacob. He was 12. I worked nights, in mornings, sometimes double shifts. We shared dinners of boxed macaroni and folded laundry together in the evenings. He used to squeeze my hand and say, "One day I'll take care of you, Mama. Just wait." And I did wait. I waited through the years, through school, through college, through every sacrifice that stitched a better life for him. And when he got that engineering job, when he finally stood on his own 2 feet, I breathed a little easier. Until he met her. Her name was Claire. She worked in finance and walked like the ground should rise to meet her feet. I tried to like her. For his sake, I tried. She brought me flowers the first time she visited, told me I had a charming little place like she was reviewing a bed and breakfast. She praised my cooking, then asked if I'd ever heard of air fryers for health. I brushed off the remarks at first, thinking it was a generational gap. But the little jabs kept coming. "You still use paper calendars. That's adorable." Or, "I'll help you with online shopping. It must be overwhelming at your age." Her tone was always sweet, but her words sliced. And then came her mother, Teresa. The kind of woman who wears silence like armor and diamonds like dog tags. She showed up to their engagement party in a gown I wouldn't dare wear to a funeral and gave me a look like I was something stuck to her shoe. During dinner, in front of everyone, she leaned over and said, "Jacob must be quite taken with Claire, especially considering, well, his modest roots." I laughed it off. What else could I do? But something in me cracked. The wedding planning shut me out completely. Teresa hired planners and designers. I was given a dress code and a table number. No role, no mother of the groom speech. I told myself it didn't matter, that what mattered was my son's happiness. But that lie got harder to tell. When the paramedics arrived, I didn't move. I sat in my seat with my hands folded neatly in my lap, the untouched drink still glistening on the table in front of me. Teresa was slumped in her chair, her skin pale, her mouth parted in breathless confusion. Claire hovered, voice high-pitched and frantic, spewing words that didn't connect, spinning stories that contradicted themselves before they even finished. "She must be allergic to something. Maybe it was the shrimp. She's been feeling off lately, haven't you, Mom?" No one was listening. Not really. Jacob stood frozen near the pantry, eyes locked on his mother-in-law like she might vanish into the floor. It was only when the EMT asked, "Did she consume anything out of the ordinary?" that I finally spoke. "She drank from this glass," I said, gently nudging it forward. The medic picked it up, sniffed it, held it to the light. Claire's eyes narrowed, her throat bobbing in a hard swallow. "Wait, no, that's the drink I made for—" She stopped herself, blinking. "I mean, I made those drinks for everyone." But there were only 2 glasses that matched. Mine and the one I gave Teresa. That was all it took. A moment of hesitation. A fragment of guilt catching in her teeth. Claire didn't realize how long I had been preparing for that moment. Not just physically, with notes and samples and silent swaps, but emotionally. I'd sat through years of being quietly erased, of being treated like a background character in my own son's life, and now, for the first time, I wasn't invisible. The police officer who arrived later wasn't interested in anyone's healings. He asked questions. Simple, cold, clear. Who prepared the drinks? Who served whom? What medications does the victim take? I answered precisely, calmly. I handed over a copy of my notes, printed and organized by date. I had extra samples of the supplements Claire had given me, ones I had hidden in Ziploc bags and labeled with masking tape. When the officer asked if I suspected anything prior to today, I looked him in the eye and said, "Yes." Claire's reaction was immediate. "You can't be serious! You think I did this? To my own mother? That's insane!" I said the drink was for me, but I didn't touch it. I switched them. Her face drained of color. "You switched them? Why would you do that?" I leaned forward slowly, because I needed to know if it was real, or if I was losing my mind, just like you wanted everyone to believe. Claire's lips parted, then closed. For the first time since I met her, she had no words. Teresa was taken to the hospital. Jacob rode in the ambulance, silent, clutching her handbag like it held the answers he couldn't find in himself. Claire stayed behind. The officer stayed too. "Just procedure," he said, but we both knew he was watching her. She paced the kitchen. She wiped the same counter twice. She mumbled something about stress and dehydration. "She'll be fine," she said over and over, but it wasn't her mother she was trying to convince. It was herself. I left quietly that night, stepping out into the cold evening air with nothing but my purse and the steel certainty that I wasn't crazy. I drove home slowly. The sky was dark and empty, the kind of dark that swallows sound. I didn't turn on music. I didn't call anyone. I just listened to my own breath and felt something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. Control. The next day, The officer called. "We'd like to test the supplements you provided, Mrs. Delaney. Can you bring in the rest?" I brought everything. The vitamins, the altered pills, the empty drink vials I had hidden from past dinners. I brought the diary, the one filled with dates, symptoms, reactions. I even brought the packaging from the herbal teas Claire used to insist I try. I sat in the station, across from two detectives, and laid out a timeline. My voice never shook, my hands didn't tremble. I wasn't afraid. I was prepared. "Why didn't you report this sooner?" one of them asked. I smiled softly. "Because I didn't have proof. Now I do." The toxicology results came back 4 days later. The drink contained a sedative, a benzodiazepine analog used for anxiety and sleep disorders. Combined with alcohol, it could cause confusion, fainting, or worse. There were traces of the same compound in the supplement Claire had given me. I knew the moment I heard the word confirmed, there was no going back. The detective's voice was flat. "You were right to be cautious, Mrs. Delaney. We'll be opening a case." I didn't cry. I didn't even celebrate. I just nodded and walked to my car. And when I sat behind the wheel, I whispered, "Thank you," to no one in particular. Maybe to my husband, maybe to the part of me that refused to be erased. Jacob came to see me 2 days later. He didn't text first, he just knocked. I opened the door and found my son standing there with tired eyes and a piece of paper trembling in his hand. "They're pressing charges," he said. "They say you drugged me, that you altered my medications." I nodded. He looked at me like a stranger. "Did you know all this time?" "I suspected, but I didn't have the proof. Not until now." He sat on the couch, leaned forward, and buried his face in his hands. "She said I was just forgetful, that I was acting erratic, that she was trying to help. Help me into a care facility? Help herself to my estate?" I asked gently. He didn't answer. "You didn't believe me, Jacob. Not once. Not when I said I felt off. Not when I stopped visiting. You let her speak for you." "I thought you were just getting older," he said softly. "I didn't think she'd ever—" He trailed off. I stared at the man I had raised, the boy who once promised to take care of me, and I felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, just distance. A canyon too wide to cross. I said she was trying to erase me, and you handed her the pen. He flinched. I stood and walked to the mantel, picked up a framed photo of him in his graduation robe. I turned it face down. "You need to leave now, Jacob." "Mom, please." "No, not today. Not right now." He left in silence. No hug, no apology, just the sound of the door closing behind him. I sat back down, alone in the house I once thought would be filled with grandchildren and laughter, and instead was filled with shadows and scars. But I wasn't broken. I was awake. They underestimated me. They thought age dulled the senses. They thought love made me blind. But I saw everything, and now the world would see it too. After Jacob left that day, I sat alone in the living room for hours. The house was still, the kind of stillness that feels earned. Outside, wind stirred the last of the dry leaves across the front step, and somewhere down the street, a dog barked, faint and directionless. But inside, there was only me. Me and the weight of truth. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply existed, grounded in the knowledge that I hadn't imagined it all, that I wasn't losing my mind, that I had been right to listen to that quiet voice inside me, the one that had warned me again and again, even when everyone else had told me to stop being dramatic. It's strange how betrayal doesn't always come with sharp edges. Sometimes it arrives soft, wrapped in lace and lavender, smiling wide and saying, "This is good for you." That's how it had begun. Claire had never shouted, never struck me, never once said anything cruel with her mouth twisted in malice. No, she'd done it with gentle smiles and manicured hands and herbal teas and memory supplements. And Jacob had let her. Or maybe he hadn't known, truly. But the effect was the same. I had been disappearing, and no one had asked why. I moved slowly through the house, collecting the remnants of the life I had almost lost. My notebook, still on the kitchen counter, the empty tea sachets stored in the back of the pantry, the vitamin bottles with their tampered seals. I placed everything into a small box and carried it up to my bedroom closet. I didn't need it anymore. Not the way I once did. The truth was out now. But I kept it just the same. A quiet archive of survival. Claire didn't reach out. Not the next day, not the next week. She vanished. Her mother remained in the hospital under observation. The sedative had left her confused, dehydrated, and temporarily impaired. There would be long-term effects, they said, but not permanent. She was lucky. And so was I. I watched it unfold from a distance. Reporters never came knocking. There was no big scandal splashed across headlines. It was all handled quietly, with the kind of hush people apply to things they're too ashamed to explain. I preferred it that way. My victory didn't need applause. A week after the charges were filed, my attorney, Michael, came by. He'd handled our estate ever since my husband passed. A kind-eyed man with thinning hair and the quiet patience of someone who has seen families unravel too many times. "We should talk about your will," he said, after accepting the cup of coffee I offered him. "It's time to update it." "I already made the decision," I told him. "I want Jacob removed." He hesitated. "Are you certain?" "I've never been more sure." I explained everything. How Claire had slowly tried to isolate me, how Jacob had allowed it, ignored the signs, doubted me when I was at my most vulnerable. He stood by while they tried to take everything. Not just the estate, me. Michael nodded and took notes. "And the trust for your granddaughter?" "She stays," I said. "She's innocent. But the conditions remain. They are never to have control over her inheritance. Not now, not ever." He understood. We updated every clause. We cut Jacob entirely. And I felt nothing while we did it. Not guilt, not revenge, just clarity. Later that night, I sat with a pen and a sheet of thick paper. I wrote the letter she would one day read. My granddaughter. Just 6 years old now, still too young to understand betrayal, too young to know how much it hurts when the people you love most try to silence you. But one day, she would know. One day, she would sit with that letter and understand why I chose to disappear, why I changed the will, why her grandmother stopped smiling politely at dinner parties and started building a life that couldn't be poisoned. I told her everything in that letter. About the tea, the pills, the lies, the switch. I told her about how truth doesn't always roar. It sometimes sits patiently in your lap, waiting. I sealed the envelope and gave it to Michael. "Deliver it when I pass," I said, "not before." And that was that. My justice, sealed in ink. A week later, I packed my bags. 2 suitcases, a few clothes, the letter my husband had written me on our 20th anniversary, the photo of Jacob as a toddler in the red wagon, and my journals. I left the house I had lived in for 38 years. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I didn't need to. I drove for hours, past the suburbs, past the courthouse, past the silent ache of familiarity, until I reached the coast. A little town where no one knew my name, where the only sound at night was the tide brushing against the docks and the wind teasing the shutters. I rented a small cottage with peeling paint and wild ivy on the front gate. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. And for the first time in years, I could breathe. I planted herbs on the porch: rosemary, basil, mint. I watered them every morning with the same care I once gave Jacob when he had night terrors as a boy. And I watched them grow, watched myself grow. The pain didn't vanish. It never does. But it changed shape. It stopped screaming. It started humming. I started volunteering at the local community center. Nothing big, just helping kids with art projects, organizing canned food drives, reading aloud to the elderly. They didn't know me as the one who was drugged, or Jacob's mother, or Claire's target. I was just Margaret, just Miss M, just someone who showed up with soft hands and kind eyes. The silence healed me more than I expected. Not the forced kind, not the silence I used to swallow at those dreadful dinners. Real silence, the kind that wraps around you like a blanket and says, "You're safe now." And for a while, that was enough. Until the knock came. Soft. Hesitant. 2 months after I left. I opened the door and found Jacob standing there. He looked older. Tired. Like life had finally caught up with him. "Hi," he said. Just that. I stepped aside, let him in. Not because I forgave him, but because I needed to hear what he had to say. We sat across from each other at the tiny table near the window. He looked around, absorbing the unfamiliar. "She's gone," he said finally. "Claire. She left. Took everything." I said nothing. "I found credit card debt in my name, accounts I didn't open. She had entire accounts under fake business names. And her mother?" He swallowed hard. "Her mother knew." I let the silence do its work. "She lied about everything," he said. "About you, about what happened. I read the report. I saw the evidence. I saw what she did." "Did you believe it?" I asked, at the time. "No," he admitted. "I believed her. I thought you were slipping." "And now?" I asked. He looked down. "Now? I know I failed you." I nodded slowly. "Yes, you did." He blinked back something. Regret, maybe tears. "Can we fix this?" "Some things aren't broken. They're destroyed," I said. "And destroyed things don't always get rebuilt." "What about the will?" he asked softly. I stared at him. "It's done. You're not in it." He flinched, but he didn't argue. He just nodded, and for the first time in years, he looked like the boy I raised, the one who used to promise he'd take care of me. "I understand," he said, and he did. Finally. He stood to leave, and just before he opened the door, he turned. "Will you ever come back?" "No," I said. "I'm already home." After Jacob left that day, I stood at the window long after his car disappeared, watching the sky turn from blue to a streaky lavender, the kind that makes you believe even endings can be beautiful. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel vengeance. What I felt was something deeper, peace laced with pain, relief wrapped in grief. He had said what I always wanted to hear, but too late. Not because the words didn't matter, but because the trust they were meant to heal had already turned to dust in my hands. There are things a mother can forgive, and there are things she can't. Not because she doesn't want to, but because forgiveness, when forced, can feel like erasing yourself again. And I had only just begun to remember who I was. Life in the cottage moved with a quiet rhythm. I woke early. I baked bread from scratch. I brought soup to a neighbor when her husband fell ill. I taught a young boy how to sew a button. These things, simple as they were, made me feel more alive than any family dinner ever had. At the community center, I started teaching a creative writing class for older women. They called it Stories That Linger. And each week, we sat in a circle and shared the things we were never allowed to say before. We talked about husbands who had left, children who had disappointed, friendships that ended without closure. No one interrupted. No one dismissed. It was the kind of room I had wished existed for me when I was quietly disappearing inside my son's home. And then, one afternoon, the local librarian pulled me aside. "Did you know someone called asking about you?" she said gently. Didn't give a name, just said they were trying to track you down. My heart paused. "What did you say?" "Told them we don't give out information," she said. "Don't worry, you're safe here." Safe. It was a word I hadn't trusted in a long time. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with the envelope I'd never opened, the one Claire sent months ago before the trial. The return address had been scribbled out in black ink, but I knew it was hers. I had tucked it away in a drawer thinking I'd burn it one day, but I hadn't. I opened it slowly, expecting apologies. Or excuses. Instead, it was a single page, typed, cold, clinical. You ruined everything. You were supposed to stay out of the way. No greeting, no signature. Just those words, like poison still trying to sting from a distance. I folded the letter in half and placed it in the fireplace. It burned fast. Some things deserve no space, not even in memory. A week later, Michael called. The legal proceedings are moving ahead. They'll likely plead out. Claire's mother has filed a claim of diminished capacity. "She's still pretending?" I asked. "They always do," he replied. "But it doesn't change the evidence, and it certainly doesn't change your estate." "I want to donate more," I said. "Expand the scholarship, start a grant for caretakers, especially the ones who don't have anyone looking out for them. Consider it done." Michael was efficient, reliable, everything Claire and her mother pretended to be. By the end of the month, my husband's estate had funded 5 new scholarships. The community center received a generous endowment under my late husband's name, and a new garden was built beside the library with a small plaque that read, "To those who remember the invisible." Because that's what I had been for a long time. Unseen. Until I saw myself again. The next time Jacob reached out was by mail. A letter in his handwriting. Not typed, no envelope with scratched out words. Just his name on the front and a small sketch his daughter had drawn. Crayon hearts, a house with a crooked roof, 3 stick figures. One had gray hair. "She still asks about you," the letter read. "She misses you. I do too." I stared at the drawing for a long time, my hands trembling, not from anger, not from heartbreak, but from the ache of wanting to believe him. But wanting isn't the same as trusting. I wrote him back, 1 page. "Tell her I love her. Tell her I'm okay. Maybe one day, when the dust has settled and the silence feels less like a punishment and more like a boundary, we can try again. Until then, take care." I didn't mail it. I tucked it into a book on the shelf, Jane Eyre, my husband's favorite. If he ever came looking again, I'd decide then, but not before. That spring, I planted more herbs: lavender, thyme, lemon balm. I spent hours in the garden, hands in soil, knees mummed with dew. I found myself humming again, little songs I used to sing when Jacob was a baby. Songs that reminded me that love, even when betrayed, doesn't vanish. It changes shape. It stops waiting. It lets go. One afternoon, a young woman at the center asked why I always wore the same necklace. A simple gold chain with a tiny compass pendant. I touched it instinctively because for a long time I was lost, and this reminds me I found my way. She smiled and nodded, not understanding fully, but sensing the weight of my words. That night, I stood on the porch watching the stars blink awake. My tea steamed gently in my hands. I thought of Claire, of her mother, of Jacob, and of the way their silence used to haunt me. And I realized it didn't anymore. Not because they had changed, but because I had. They say revenge is sweet, but I disagree. Revenge is quiet. It's patient. It's living well while they wait for you to shatter and realizing you're already whole. And the most powerful part of it all, when they try to rewrite your story and you've already written the ending. Summer came to the coast slowly, the kind of soft warmth that made everything bloom with quiet confidence. My garden flourished. The lavender grew wild along the fence, bees drifting lazily through the stalks. I spent my mornings kneeling in the dirt, fingers deep in the soil, and my evenings curled up with a book, the kind with fragile pages that smelled like time. No headlines had come, no reporters, no gossip. Just time passing in the most gentle way, healing what had once been shredded. Then one morning, I walked to the mailbox and found a plain white envelope. No name, no return address, just my cottage number handwritten in blue ink. I hesitated. My heart didn't race, but it did tighten. I took it inside, placed it on the counter, and made a pot of tea before I touched it again. When I finally opened it, a single photograph fell out. It was Jacob and Claire, sitting in a courtroom. Claire was pale, eyes glassy, her mother behind her in a wheelchair, her face stiff like porcelain. Jacob's head was turned, not looking at either of them, just down at the floor. Tucked behind the photo was a typed letter. Not from them, from an anonymous sender, likely a court clerk or someone who'd heard my story whispered through the cracks. It simply said, "She took a plea deal. Community service. Mental health evaluation. Her mother's condition is worsening. No appeal filed. No one spoke on her behalf." He didn't look up once. I folded the photo and slid it into a drawer. I didn't need it, but I kept it. Not for revenge, not for proof, just as a reminder that truth eventually catches up, even when no one's watching. That weekend, I took a walk along the beach. There's something about the sea, its relentless rhythm, its complete disregard for human timelines, that puts everything into perspective. Waves crash whether your heart is broken or not. The tide doesn't wait for apologies. It just moves. And so did I. At the community center, I began organizing a fundraiser. We were raising money to build a tiny annex, a wellness room for caretakers, somewhere they could rest, talk, breathe. The project moved fast. Donations came in from all over. Someone shared my story online. Not the full version, just a soft one. Local widow helps others after surviving betrayal. No names, no details. Just enough for people to understand that healing can lead to helping. And one day, a woman arrived, mid-30s, tired eyes. She approached me quietly after one of the classes. "Are you Miss Margaret?" she asked. "I read about you. I think something similar might be happening to my mom. My sister moved in and she's been acting strange. My mom forgets things she never used to forget, and my sister keeps saying it's just menopause." I looked at her and nodded slowly. "Come by next week," I said. "We'll talk. You're not alone." And just like that, it began again. A ripple. A quiet chain reaction. Because when you survive something like that, you carry a torch. One you didn't ask for, but one you're obligated to pass along, so no one else is left in the dark. Weeks passed, then months. Jacob didn't write again. I didn't expect him to. The last I had heard, he had moved into a small apartment on the other side of the city. Claire was gone, no one knew where. Her mother had been placed in a long-term facility, her assets frozen, her visitors restricted. The silence was complete. But it wasn't the same silence that used to suffocate me. This one was clean, natural, like a chapter had ended and the book didn't need to be reopened. One morning, as I was sweeping the porch, I found my granddaughter standing at the gate, alone, holding a backpack and a small stuffed rabbit. My breath caught. I hadn't seen her in nearly 2 years. "Daddy brought me," she said. "He said you might want company today." I looked up and saw Jacob waiting in the car, hands on the wheel, staring ahead. He didn't come out, just waited. I opened the gate. "You want some pancakes?" I asked. She grinned. "With syrup?" "With syrup," I nodded. We sat at the little table, her feet swinging above the floor, syrup dripping from her chin. She chattered about school, her friends, her rabbit's new name. She didn't ask why she hadn't seen me. Didn't mention Claire. Children don't need explanations. They feel what's true long before it's spoken. Later, as I brushed her hair and braided it the way I used to, she looked up at me and said, "You smell like home." That night, I tucked her into the guest bed, wrapped her in the quilt I had made from my husband's old flannel shirts, and sat beside her until she drifted off. Then I stood at the window and stared out at Jacob's car, still parked at the end of the road. He hadn't left. He was waiting. I walked out, slow and deliberate. When I reached the car, he rolled down the window. "Thank you," he said. His voice was low, strained. She's been asking to see you for months. I didn't know if it was okay." I nodded once. "She's always okay here." He swallowed. "I'm not asking for forgiveness, Mom. I know I don't deserve that. I just wanted you to know I see it now. Everything. I was blind. I was scared, and I'm sorry." I leaned into the window just enough to see his face clearly. "You let them almost erase me, Jacob, and then you let me disappear. That's not something you fix with a few visits and quiet apologies." He nodded. "I know. But she's a child. She still has time. If you love her, protect her, and teach her to see what's real, not what's convenient." "I will," he said. I turned and walked away. He didn't follow, didn't beg, didn't offer promises. Just drove off slowly, the tires whispering down the gravel road. Inside, I watched my granddaughter sleep, her tiny chest rising and falling with the steadiness of someone still untouched by betrayal. And I whispered a promise to her. Not that I'd stay forever, but that I'd always be here. When she needed truth, when she needed warmth, when she needed someone who wouldn't lie. Because the world tries to convince us we're forgettable, that quiet women don't matter. But I've learned that silence, when chosen, can be the most powerful thing in the world, especially when it's built on truth. And now that truth lived here, in this little cottage, in my garden, in the soft syrup of pancakes, in the braid down a child's back. Claire tried to erase me. Her mother tried to replace me. My son tried to forget me. But in the end, I outlasted them all. Not with fury, not with war, but with time. The next few weeks passed in a way I hadn't known I needed. My granddaughters stayed with me every weekend, and each time she came, she brought a little more sunlight with her. She didn't know what had happened, not really. Children carry instincts, not details. She didn't need the whole story. All she needed to know was that here, in my cottage, with the scent of lavender in the air and music playing softly from the kitchen, she was safe. We painted rocks one morning using old polish and cheap brushes. She gave hers bright pink wings and told me it was a fairy who could guard dreams. I placed it at the base of my herb garden, right next to the thyme. Every time I passed it, I smiled. Jacob would pick her up quietly at the end of each visit. He never stepped inside. He didn't try to force anything. I think he knew that anything real would take years to rebuild, if ever. But he showed up, on time, soft-eyed, grateful. And that mattered more than he probably realized. At the community center, the wellness room finally opened. We called it the Nest. Inside, there were plush chairs, soft lighting, journals on the shelf, and a kettle always warm. Women came in shaking. Some came in angry. Some came in silent. And every single one left a little straighter in the spine. I started leading small support circles, not as an expert, but as a witness. We told the truth in whispers at first, then louder, and when one woman cried because her own daughter had left her with nothing but bills and a worn-out mattress, I reached across and took her hand. "You're not alone," I said. "None of us are." And I meant it. One afternoon, a letter arrived from a woman named Lorraine. She said she'd seen a post online about the Nest, said she too had once been placed under false guardianship, said her daughter had signed her name to papers she never saw, said no one had believed her until she ran away in the middle of the night with nothing but her keys and a purse full of expired medicine. "I thought I was crazy," she wrote, "until I saw you, until I realized maybe I was just unprotected." I wrote her back, invited her to visit. 2 weeks later, she showed up with a worn suitcase and a fire in her chest that reminded me of the woman I used to be. We sat on my porch until midnight, sipping chamomile and sharing everything we'd lost, then everything we planned to gain. It was like breathing beside a mirror. I didn't just see myself in her. I saw proof that telling the truth out loud can ripple in ways you never predict. The stories of women like us weren't in magazines. They weren't headlines. They were buried behind closed doors, locked up by people who smiled too big and said all the right things while stealing the ground out from under our feet. But we were still here. Claire hadn't resurfaced. No letters, no calls, no rumors. Part of me wondered if she'd left the country, reinvented herself in some other place where no one knew what she had done. But even that thought stopped haunting me because I realized something crucial. She could vanish, and I'd still be here, still rising, still warm, still full of purpose. One Sunday morning, my granddaughter asked if she could bring a friend over. "Her name's Bella," she said. "Her mom's always working. She doesn't really have a backyard." I said, "Yes, of course." Bella arrived with big eyes and a nervous shuffle, holding a notebook like a shield. But after an hour in the garden, she was laughing in the hammock and picking strawberries like she lived there all her life. As I watched them, I realized that maybe this was the legacy I was meant to leave. Not estates or big family names, not trust funds or portraits on mantles, but safety, memory, gentle spaces where children could learn what peace felt like. I received one more message from Jacob that month, a short voicemail. She asked if you could come to Grandparents' Day at school. No pressure, I just told her I'd ask. I didn't respond right away. I let the request sit in my heart for 2 days. Then I picked up the phone and called back. "Tell her I'll be there." And I was. I wore a sky blue dress, brought lemon bars I'd made from scratch. I sat in the small plastic chair, knees cramped, surrounded by sticky fingers and paper hearts. When she introduced me, she didn't say, "This is my grandma." She said, "This is my person." And every adult in the room turned to look at me like I'd been knighted. After the event, Jacob waited outside. He looked older than I remembered. His shoulders heavier, like he'd finally realized the cost of everything. He didn't speak as I walked past him, just opened the car door for his daughter. As I stepped away, he finally said, "You're saving her. You're saving me." I didn't turn around, just nodded once. Not out of cruelty, but because I didn't need to hold his gratitude anymore. The only thing I needed to hold was the hand of a little girl who still believed in fairy rocks and syrup-drenched pancakes. That evening, I lit a candle in my husband's memory. I stood by the photo I'd kept, him in his flannel shirt, one arm around me, the other pointing at the camera like he was making some joke I'd long forgotten. I told him thank you for the life we built, for the money that saved me, for the quiet lessons he left behind. And then I said goodbye. Not because I was done loving him, but because I was done needing his memory to survive. I had found my own flame, and it was burning stronger now. With every woman who walked through the nest, with every seed that grew in my garden, and with every story whispered into the night and finally heard. I had become what no one expected. A survivor who didn't just rebuild, but transformed. I was no longer waiting for justice. I had already created it. In laughter, in community, in the kind of warmth no one could poison or own. And now, with every step I took, I was walking further from the pain. Not to escape it, but to prove it didn't define me, and it never would again. Fall brought a wind that rattled the shutters at night and painted the trees in copper and fire. I'd always loved autumn, but this year it felt deeper, fuller. Not just the season changing, but something inside me finally settling. The kind of peace that doesn't come from resolution, but from reclamation. I walked the garden in longer coats now, warm scarf tucked at my throat, the scent of wood smoke drifting in from a neighbor's chimney. Life wasn't dramatic anymore. It wasn't loud. It was soft and steady, like a song played on repeat while you clean your house and hum along. Then one morning, the phone rang. Not my cell, my landline, the one only a handful of people even remembered I had. I picked it up out of instinct. "Is this Margaret Stone?" the voice on the other end asked. I didn't recognize it. Male, firm, official. "Speaking. This is Detective Hale. I'm following up on a report made in connection to a long-term abuse and coercion case. Your name appeared as a relevant party in the investigation. I'm calling to request a statement, if you're willing." I sat down slowly. "What kind of case?" "Guardianship abuse," he said. "Medical coercion. Possible financial fraud tied to fabricated incapacitation filings. The woman in question is Claire Winston. We believe she was involved in several similar patterns across state lines." I felt everything inside me still. "You're saying I wasn't the only one?" "That's correct, but we believe your case might have been the earliest known incident. A baseline." I closed my eyes. For a moment, everything tilted. Not with fear, but with vindication. Not only had I survived, but now my survival might help stop her from ever doing it again. "I'll give my statement," I said. "Anything you need." The detective sounded relieved. "Thank you. You're not the only one she hurt, but you might be the first one who got out in time." After the call, I stood at the kitchen window for a long time, watching the leaves fall in spirals, golden and slow. Claire hadn't vanished. She just moved on to her next target. But this time, someone caught her. Someone brave enough to speak. Maybe someone like me. Later that week, I gave my statement. It wasn't hard. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I sat at the community center, surrounded by women I now called sisters, and I told my truth like it was a story I'd once read in a book I no longer needed to keep. When I finished, the detective looked at me and said, "You have no idea how rare it is for victims to live through something like this and come out with this kind of clarity." I smiled gently. It's not clarity. It's survival. And survival rewrites everything. The investigation made quiet waves. I didn't go public, didn't want to, but word spread in small circles, and more letters began arriving. From women in Kansas, from a man in Oregon whose father had been stripped of legal rights by his second wife, from a retired nurse who'd been pushed into signing away her savings after a fabricated dementia diagnosis. Every letter echoed the same fear. They told me no one would believe me. I answered each one, not as an expert, just as someone who once lived through the same fire. I didn't give advice, I gave truth. That healing isn't a clean, straight line. That sometimes justice doesn't come with handcuffs, but with community. That even if the courts never catch up, your dignity can still be returned. One woman came to stay in my spare room. Just for a week, she said. Her name was Delilah. She'd escaped in the night the same way I once imagined I might have had to, with a duffel bag and bruises that weren't on her skin, but in her voice. I gave her tea, a warm bath, quiet. And when she sobbed into my lap one evening and whispered, "I thought I was crazy," I stroked her hair and said, "That's how they keep us silent. But you're not crazy. You're awake." That same week, my granddaughter brought home a school essay. She'd been asked to write about a hero. She could have picked anyone, an athlete, a cartoon, some glossy celebrity. But she wrote about me. She wrote about how I grew tomatoes and lavender and made the best pancakes in the world, how I built a whole room at the community center for people who needed to feel safe, how I smiled like I knew a secret, but it was probably just that I was happy. And at the very end, she wrote, "My grandma doesn't wear a cape, but she rescues people with her voice." I folded the essay and tucked it into my desk drawer beside the photo of me and my husband. I didn't cry, not because it didn't move me, but because some moments deserve stillness instead of tears. The next morning, I called Detective Hale and left a voicemail. "If this goes to trial, I'll testify. I'll say everything. Not because I want to destroy her, but because I want to protect whoever's next." Then I sat on the porch with a fresh cup of coffee, watching the wind roll in, and realized I no longer lived in fear of what had happened. I no longer braced for the past to come knocking, because the past had already lost. Claire's name didn't sting anymore. Her face didn't haunt me, her shadow no longer stretched over my days, because I had filled my world with something brighter. And shadows don't survive where there is light. In the garden, the last of the autumn squash hung heavy on the vine. I planned to roast them for soup. My granddaughter said she wanted to help, even if all she did was stir. I said that was more than enough. And as we cooked, she asked, "Do you think people can really change?" I looked at her, her big brown eyes full of questions the world hadn't answered yet. I said, "I think people can learn. But change, that has to come from inside. And not everyone's brave enough to do that." She nodded slowly, then hugged me. "I'm glad you never changed. You stayed good." And I thought, no, I didn't. I did change. I stopped apologizing. I stopped making myself smaller. I stopped waiting for people to do the right thing and started doing it myself. That was my change. And it had saved me. The world hadn't rescued me. No man had ridden in with solutions. I had done this, with dirt under my nails and scars on my spirit, with truth and time and tea. And now, even as Claire's case was being examined in courtrooms and Jacob quietly rebuilt what was left of his life, I had something none of them could ever steal again: peace. I stood at the back of the courtroom when Claire was finally brought in. I hadn't planned to be there, but something inside me needed to witness it. Not for vengeance, but for finality. She looked smaller than I remembered. Pale, jittery. The confidence she once wore like armor now stripped to a threadbare cardigan and trembling hands. She didn't see me. Or if she did, she didn't react. Her eyes flitted around the room like a trapped bird, desperate for an exit. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even satisfied. I felt resolved, like a page turning without a sound. The judge read the charges: fraud, manipulation, exploitation of a vulnerable adult, medical coercion. I listened like I was hearing the weather. It didn't matter how the gavel landed. What mattered was that the truth had finally stood in a room with her name on it and spoken without fear. After the hearing, I walked out into the sunlight. I took the deepest breath of my life. I never saw her again after that. I don't know what sentence she received. I didn't ask, because her consequences were no longer my responsibility. My life no longer revolved around the people who tried to erase me. It revolved around those who helped me rebuild, around women like Delilah and Lorraine, around young girls with notebooks and dreams, around my granddaughter's laughter in the hallway, her socks sliding on wood floors, her arms wide open like she was always flying toward love. One spring afternoon, I hosted a gathering at the community garden. Tables with homemade food, folding chairs under string lights. We read poems, shared recipes, played old records. At one point, Delilah stood up and said, "I used to think I was broken. Then I met Margaret. And she showed me I was just unprotected." Her voice cracked, but she didn't stop. She didn't fix me. She reminded me that I was never the one who needed fixing. Everyone clapped and I smiled, not because I needed the praise, but because I knew this was what legacy really looked like. Not money, not property, but healing passed like water between hands. That night, my granddaughter fell asleep on the couch with her head in my lap. I stroked her hair and whispered a promise into the air the way I used to when my husband was alive. "She'll never feel what I felt," I said. "She'll never wonder if she's worth saving." I visited my husband's grave a week later, brought him white peonies and a letter. In the letter, I told him everything. How Jacob had finally started going to therapy, how the house he sold was used to fund a scholarship for caregivers escaping abusive family structures, how Claire's name would never again have power in my life, how I missed him every day, but I had become someone even he might not recognize. Not because I was different, but because I had grown into someone who didn't just survive trauma, I turned it into purpose. As I left the cemetery, the wind caught my scarf and tugged it behind me like wings. I didn't chase it. I let it fly. Because some things are meant to be released. I don't need revenge stories to prove my worth. I don't need public apologies or broadcasted justice. I need laughter in my kitchen and love that doesn't ask me to shrink. I need warm soup in winter and gardens that bloom in spite of everything. I need women around me who know what it means to be buried and come back louder. And I have all of that now. One day, my granddaughter asked, "Did you ever think your life would be this full?" I paused before answering. "I used to think I was at the end," I told her. "But really, I was just at the beginning." She beamed, then leaned in close. "You're my beginning." And in that moment, I knew I hadn't just reclaimed my story, I had rewritten it completely. If you're listening to this, wondering if it's too late for you, it isn't. If you've been silenced, gaslit, discarded, hear me now. You are not alone. You are not crazy. You are not weak. You are waking up. And there are people waiting for you on the other side of that fire, arms wide open, tea warm on the stove, with stories that sound just like yours and futures that look nothing like your past. I promise you, there is life after betrayal. There is power in the second chapter. There is peace so soft, so steady, it silences every lie they ever told about you. I found mine. And now it's your turn. Come home to yourself. And if you felt what I felt, I hope you'll take a second to subscribe and share this story, because someone out there is still trapped in that silence, and maybe your voice will be the one that leads them out.